Before we jump into this crazy story, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Maybe a sunny neighborhood in California, a bustling high-rise in Chicago, or a quiet farmhouse out in Kentucky. I love seeing just how far these Karen tales of chaos and karma reach across the world. The sun was hanging high in the sky, beating down with the kind of heavy heat that makes the air shimmer above the pavement. My shirt clung to my back as I walked up the driveway, already picturing the relief of a cold drink on the patio and maybe a quiet swim before the evening. It was supposed to be one of those calm summer afternoons, the kind where the world finally slowed down. Instead, the first thing I heard wasn't the chirping of cicadas or the gentle hum of sprinklers. It was bass. Thudding, booming bass, rattling my windows like some nightclub had relocated to my backyard. I froze halfway up the steps. Laughter spilled over the fence, high-pitched squeals mixing with the unmistakable splash of bodies hitting water. Then came the shattering sound of glass, followed by a round of drunken cheering. My gut twisted. I dropped my bag by the door and stormed around the side of the house. The gate was wide open, swinging slightly in the breeze, like a welcome sign to chaos. I turned the corner, and the sight hit me like a punch. My pool, the one I'd worked my tail off to build, was packed wall to wall with strangers. 20, maybe more. Some were floating with drinks in hand. Some were cannonballing into the deep end. And others lounged on my chairs like they'd paid rent here. Beer cans littered the deck. Towels I'd never seen before draped across the railing. A greasy trail of sunscreen smeared across my patio table. It was carnage. And right in the middle of it, standing like twin queens at their royal court, were Emily and Ava. Emily wore a floral sundress stretched taut across her frame, the chest cut low and wide, her sun hat tilted as though she was posing for a summer magazine shoot. She had her arms raised, gesturing dramatically, a glass of sangria in one hand as she barked orders at the crowd like a drill sergeant. Ava stood beside her, tank top and pink shorts clinging to her skin, her face pinched with the kind of permanent scowl that makes you wonder if she ever enjoyed a single day in her life. They both had oversized sunglasses shielding their eyes, but I could still feel the sharpness of their glares as they spotted me. "There he is," Emily announced, her voice cutting through the chaos. She raised her drink in mock salute. The pool prince himself finally decides to grace us with his presence. Ava laughed, short and sharp, and pointed her finger at me like I was the intruder. "You're late to your own party," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "What's the matter? Don't like being social." For a moment, I was too stunned to speak. My jaw tightened as my eyes swept across the wreckage of my yard. A man I'd never seen before was perched on the edge of my grill, greasy fingers digging into a bag of chips he'd clearly taken from my pantry. A couple of teenagers were daring each other to jump from the shed roof into the shallow end. My stomach lurched as I watched one of them wobble at the edge, arms pinwheeling, before pulling back at the last second. I found my voice sharp and strained. "What the hell is this?" Emily rolled her eyes dramatically and sipped her drink. "Relax, it's just a little get-together. Community spirit, you know? Don't be so uptight. This isn't community anything," I snapped, moving closer. "This is my house. My pool. None of you were invited. That should have been enough. Any normal person would have at least looked guilty, maybe started gathering their things. But the Karen sisters weren't normal." Ava's lip curled into a smirk. "You're selfish, you know that? Look at all this space going to waste. What's the harm in letting the neighborhood enjoy it once in a while? It's not like you're using it 24/7. The crowd chuckled, emboldened by her bravado. My fists clenched at my sides. I forced myself to take a slow breath, try not to let the anger boil over. If I exploded, I'd give them exactly what they wanted, something to twist, something to weaponize. "You need to leave," I said, low and firm. Emily leaned back, balancing her drink with exaggerated care, and laughed. "Oh, come on. Don't be dramatic. You've got the whole summer to sit out here by yourself. Just let people enjoy the day. Nobody's hurting anything." As if on cue, another beer bottle tipped off the side of the pool and shattered across the stone tiles. A barefoot teenager yelped as shards scattered near his feet. My pulse hammered in my ears. Yeah, I said through gritted teeth. Nobody's hurting anything. I moved to the edge of the pool, raising my voice over the chatter. Party's over. Everyone out. Now. The reaction was a mix of boos and groans, like I just turned off their favorite show. A few people, reluctantly, began moving toward their things, but Emily clapped her hands loudly. Don't listen to him, she barked. He's bluffing. He wouldn't dare kick out the whole neighborhood. He knows how that'll look. Ava chimed in, her voice sharp as a whip. If you even think about calling the cops, we'll make sure everyone in this community knows exactly how hostile and unfriendly you are. Nobody will want you around here. The crowd stilled, watching me, waiting to see if I'd fold under the pressure. My throat was dry, my palms slick with sweat. They had me cornered, and they knew it. I swallowed hard, choosing my words carefully. I don't care what story you try to spin. You're trespassing. This is illegal, and if you don't leave, I will call the police. Emily tilted her head, smiling as though I were a child throwing a tantrum. Do it. Call them. Let's see how well it plays out when we tell them you locked your neighbors out of the pool you promised the HOA would share. That's a lie, I shot back instantly. But doubt flickered across the faces of some of the guests. They didn't know the truth, and the Karens thrived on that uncertainty. Ava seized the moment, stepping forward and raising her voice so the whole group could hear. He's been hoarding this place for months, acting like he's above everyone else, like he owns the sun and the water too. Don't fall for his scare tactics. We have every right to be here. A chorus of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded. Some frowned at me. The power was shifting and not in my favor. Inside, rage and disbelief tangled like wires sparking in the dark. I wanted to scream, to drag every single one of them out by their collar. But I could feel the trap tightening. If I lashed out, they'd spin it into proof of everything they'd accuse me of. I couldn't afford that. So I swallowed the fury burning at the back of my throat and tried again. Last chance. You all need to go. Now. The silence that followed was heavier than the heat. For a brief, hopeful second, I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd give in. But then Ava let out a harsh laugh, snapping it apart. You hear that, everyone? Last chance. Sounds like he's bluffing again. The crowd laughed nervously, like a pack reassured by its leaders. Emily raised her glass, once more, her voice ringing with authority. The party continues. And just like that, music blared back to life. Splashes filled the air, and the defiance was complete. My warning had bounced off them like water off stone. I stood there, rooted in place, watching as my backyard transformed into a war zone I was losing control of. Kids climbed dangerously close to the fence. Adults sprawled across my chairs. Bottles, cracked open like this, was their personal bar. Every second stretched, hot and suffocating, as if the summer sun itself had chosen sides against me. I knew then that reason was dead here. There would be no compromise, no polite resolution. They'd made that clear. I stepped back toward the gate, my jaw tight, my thoughts racing. Emily caught the movement, her voice slicing through the air once again. Where you going, pool boy? Don't sulk. Come grab a drink. Maybe if you lighten up, you'll actually have some fun for once. The laughter that followed burned hotter than the asphalt under my shoes. I gripped the gate, forcing myself not to slam it shut. My eyes swept the yard one last time. The cracked tile by the pool. The glass glittering dangerously across the deck. The greasy fingerprints smeared across the armrests of my furniture. The two sisters ruling over it all like tyrants, sneering at me as though I were nothing more than an annoyance in their perfect day. I felt the decision harden in my chest like stone. If they wanted to treat my home like a playground, they were about to learn what it meant to break the rules. But not yet. Not here, not in the open where they could twist it into another story. I stepped outside the gate, pulling it shut behind me. The music roared back up, drowning out my thoughts. For now, I let them believe they'd won. What they didn't know was that the real game had just begun. The music rattled through the walls of my house long after I shut the gate, each bass note thudding like a hammer against my skull. I stood in the narrow shadow beside the fence, chest heaving, sweat sticking to my neck. Every instinct screamed at me to storm back in, to drag them out one by one, but I knew how that would end. Emily and Ava were too skilled at twisting the truth, too loud and brazen to ever let my side of the story breathe. If I made one wrong move, I'd be painted as the villain in my own home. I needed patience. I needed control. The shouting behind the fence grew louder. I risked a glance through the slats. Emily had climbed onto one of my lounge chairs, using it as a throne, commanding the crowd with that booming, grating voice. She raised her glass high, droplets of sangria spilling down her arm. Ava stood at her side like a bodyguard, wagging her finger in every direction, snapping at people to grab more drinks, more food, more of everything that wasn't theirs. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the damage spreading like a disease across my yard. One man tried to wrestle open the poolside storage bin where I kept cleaning supplies. A woman shoved open the shed door and dragged out my lawn chairs without even looking inside first. Laughter burst as two kids splashed each other violently in the shallow end, their sharp shrieks slicing through the music. Every corner of my property had been claimed, every inch of my hard work swallowed by their chaos. And then it happened. The sound of stones splitting, sharp and ugly, carried over the noise. My eyes locked on the pool's edge, where a heavy-set man had slipped while climbing out, his foot crashing down onto the tiles. A jagged crack split through the glossy surface. I clenched my teeth until my jaw ached. That repair alone would cost hundreds, maybe more. The man laughed it off, stumbling back into the crowd, and Emily cheered as if it were some kind of performance. Not one of them cared. Not one of them understood what it meant to work years for something and watch it crumble under careless feet. I forced myself to breathe. In, out, keep calm. Losing my head here would only feed them. Then came another flash of dread. At the far end of the pool, a boy no older than 17 was perched on the shed roof, crouched like a diver, preparing to leap. His friends shouted encouragement, egging him on. My pulse hammered against my ribs. The deep end wasn't nearly deep enough for that kind of dive. If he jumped, he'd break his neck. I couldn't stop myself. I slammed my hand against the fence and shouted over the noise. Get down from there before you kill yourself. For a moment, silence rippled outward. Heads turned. The boy froze, wobbling slightly at the edge. Then Ava's voice cut through like a blade. Don't listen to him. He's just trying to ruin the fun. Jump if you want. The boy laughed nervously, wavered again, and then finally climbed back down. Relief shuddered through me, though it was poisoned quickly by the sight of Ava smirking in triumph. She had turned a near accident into another victory. I pulled away from the fence, my fist trembling. This wasn't just disrespect anymore. It was danger. And when someone got hurt, I knew exactly who they blame. Me. The decision formed in my mind, clear and cold. I had tried reasoning. I had tried warning. None of it mattered. If they were going to treat my property like a carnival, then I would turn the carnival against them. I waited, pacing the side of the house, listening as the party grew wilder. They thought I'd given up, that I'd slunk away in defeat. That arrogance would be my weapon. Minutes dragged like hours until I was sure every last one of them was inside the yard. I moved quietly, circling around the back of the fence where an old padlock hung on a hook. I hadn't used it in years, but the metal was still strong, still solid. My hands were steady as I looped the chain through the gate and clicked it shut with a snap that echoed in my chest. The trap was set. I stepped back, staring at the locked gate. From inside, laughter still roared, unbroken. They hadn't noticed. Not yet. I turned toward the patio, my eyes catching the circuit breaker near the wall. With a flick of my wrist, the music choked mid-beat, leaving behind only the startled cries of the guests. The silence after the noise was deafening, almost surreal. Confusion spread quickly. People glanced around, muttering. Someone shouted for the music to come back on. Emily's voice rose above them all. Who touched the speakers? Turn it back on. No one could. The silence stretched uneasy, and then the first guest wandered toward the gate. He pulled. It rattled, locked tight. He frowned and tried again. Others joined, tugging, pushing, their voices rising with panic. Hey, it's stuck. Did it jam? Open the damn thing, it won't move. Then Emily saw me standing calmly on the other side, my arms crossed. Her face twisted, red with fury. What the hell do you think you're doing? She shrieked, storming up to the gate. You can't just lock us in like animals. I raised my phone, the camera, light, blinking red. Funny, I said evenly. That's exactly what I'm doing. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ava shoved her sunglasses down her nose, glaring at me with wide, furious eyes. Unlock this right now, or I swear. You swear what? I cut her off. That you'll break more of my property? That you'll bring in more people who don't belong here? Keep going. Every word, every threat is going on camera. Emily slammed her palms against the gate, the sound reverberating like a gunshot. You can't do this. It's illegal. You're kidnapping us. I tilted the phone slightly, making sure the crack in the tile, the broken glass, the drunk stumbling by the pool were all in frame. Kidnapping? No. Documenting trespassers on private property? Absolutely. The shift in the crowd was immediate. Nervous murmurs spread as people realized they weren't just enjoying a stolen afternoon anymore. They were evidence. One man tried climbing the fence, his shirt riding up as he scrambled for a grip. He slipped halfway, landing flat on his back with a grunt. Laughter broke out, sharp and cruel, but it only deepened the panic underneath. Ava kicked the gate so hard the chain rattled, her voice cracking as she shouted, "This isn't over. You're going to regret this." I smiled coldly, keeping my voice calm and steady. No, Ava. The only people who will regret anything are standing on the wrong side of this fence. The tension mounted with every passing second. Guests crowded near the gate, shouting, demanding, some pleading. Emily's face turned a blotchy shade of crimson as she tried to rally them, her voice hoarse from yelling. But the authority she'd wielded so easily was slipping. The crowd wasn't laughing anymore. They weren't cheering. They were scared. I let the silence stretch, savoring the shift in power. For the first time all day, I wasn't the one cornered. Then, from the distance, came the faint wail of sirens. Heads turned. A ripple of dread passed through the crowd. Emily's head snapped toward me, eyes wide behind her glasses. You didn't. I held her gaze, the faintest smile curling at my lips. Oh, I did. The sirens grew louder, swelling with each second, and the panic inside the yard finally broke open. People rushed for the gate, pounding, shouting, begging. Some tried to vault the fence again, desperate to escape before it was too late. Ava was still screaming, her voice ragged, as if sheer rage could break steel. But the lock held fast, and I stood there, calm and unflinching, my phone recording every frantic second. The sirens wailed closer, their sharp cry cutting through the shouts and pounding fists inside the fence. Blue and red lights flickered across the street as two police cruisers rolled to a stop in front of my house. Neighbors were already gathered at the sidewalks, some with phones raised, whispering eagerly as the spectacle unfolded. The chaos I had endured alone all afternoon was now a public show, and I knew exactly how this would play out if I stayed calm and let the truth speak for itself. Emily was the first to act, shoving through the crowd at the gate, her sun hat nearly toppling as she pushed her glasses down her nose to glare at the approaching officers. She plastered on a wide, fake smile that twitched around the edges, waving her arms as if greeting old friends. "Officers, over here," she called, her voice dripping with exaggerated relief. "Thank God you came. We've been locked in here against our will." Ava was quick to follow, slamming her palms against the gate with dramatic force. "He trapped us. He chained us in like prisoners. We could have died in here if you hadn't shown up." Their guests began echoing the same story, voices rising in a chorus of panic and accusation. The scene looked chaotic, and I knew how convincing it could appear to someone just arriving. If I hadn't prepared, if I didn't have the evidence, I might have actually been in trouble. The officers exchanged looks as they approached, one younger and tight-jawed, the other older with graying hair and a measured pace. They stopped a few feet from me, their eyes shifting between my calm stance outside the gate and the frantic mob clawing from the other side. "Sir," the older officer said carefully, Can you explain what's happening here? I lifted my phone, the screen still glowing, and pressed play. Instantly, the shrieks and laughter from earlier blared from the speaker. The video showed the cracked tile near the pool, the beer cans scattered across the deck, Ava screaming threats at me, while Emily waved her drink like a trophy. It was all there, captured in crystal clarity. They broke into my backyard, I said steadily. They invited over 24 people without my permission, damaged my property, and refused to leave when I asked them to. I locked the gate to keep the situation contained until you arrived. That's the only reason any of them are still here. The younger officer leaned closer to the phone, his frown deepening with each passing second of footage. The older one nodded slowly, then turned his attention to the mob inside. Is that true? He called. The guests suddenly found their voices muted. The bravado drained from them as the evidence played against their denials. Some shifted uncomfortably, glancing anywhere but at me. A few even began murmuring excuses, claims they hadn't known it was trespassing, that they thought the sisters had permission. Emily, however, was relentless. She slammed her hands against the bars again, her face blotchy with rage. That's taken out of context. He provoked us, he harassed us, and now he's manipulating the story to make us look bad. You can't just take his side. But the officers weren't looking at her the way they had looked at me. Their eyes were cool, unimpressed. Ava, realizing her sister's performance was falling flat, tried another angle. She jabbed her finger at me through the gate. He endangered children. A boy nearly got hurt because he let his property get unsafe. This pool should be open to the community. And he. The younger officer cut her off sharply. Ma'am, you don't have the authority to dictate that. This is private property. You and your guests are trespassing. The words hit like a hammer. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd of uninvited guests. One man muttered something about leaving and made for the fence, but the officer barked, "Stay where you are. Nobody leaves until we get statements." Emily's voice cracked as she tried again. "You don't understand. He hates us. He's been trying to push us out of the neighborhood for months. This is harassment." I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not loudly, not mockingly, but a short, sharp exhale that carried all the absurdity of her claim. The officers turned back to me, waiting. I scrolled through my phone and showed them a string of texts Emily had sent earlier in the year, complaints about my yard, my guests, even the color of my pool chairs. Each one was dripping with entitlement, each one a nail in the coffin of her credibility. The older officer's jaw tightened. He turned to his partner. "Get their IDs. Every single one of them. We'll be writing citations for trespassing and public disturbance." The reaction inside the yard was immediate. Guests exploded with protests, some angry, some pleading. Emily shouted until her voice cracked, waving her arms wildly as though she could still command the scene. Ava kicked the gate so hard the chain rattled. Her face twisted with fury. But it was useless. The officers moved methodically, pulling people aside one at a time, writing tickets as neighbors outside whispered and filmed. Justice was unfolding in real time, and for the first time all day, the knot in my chest began to loosen. The process stretched on, each citation handed out like a stamp of consequence. Some guests cursed, some begged, but none escaped the steady pens of the officers. Emily and Ava, of course, fought harder than anyone. Emily demanded to speak to a supervisor, claimed she had a lawyer on speed dial. Ava tried to physically shove past the gate until one officer threatened to cuff her for obstruction. Finally, the crowd dispersed, slinking out one by one under the watchful eyes of the law. My yard emptied, the wreckage left behind shining in the moonlight. Broken glass, overturned chairs, the cracked tile glistening with water. The silence after the chaos was almost surreal. But the sisters weren't finished. Not yet. Emily lingered at the gate, her voice hoarse, her hat askew. "This isn't over," she spat. "We'll take this to the HOA. We'll tell everyone what you did." I stepped closer, phone still raised, the red light blinking steadily. My voice was calm even. "Go ahead. Tell them. And I'll show every neighbor this video. I'll show them the damage, the lies, the threats. See how far your story goes then. For the first time that day, her bravado faltered. She yanked her sunglasses back up, covering the crack in her expression, and stormed off with Ava stumbling after her. The officers gave me a final nod, assuring me a report would be filed, and then they too departed, leaving me alone in the wreckage of my yard. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the heavy night air, the scent of chlorine and spilled alcohol mixing unpleasantly in my nose. The adrenaline was slow to fade, leaving behind a strange hollowness. The days that followed unfolded like a second act of justice. The HOA called me in, claiming they'd received a complaint about my hostile behavior. I arrived prepared, video queued up, evidence printed in neat stacks. The board members watched in silence as Emily and Ava's performance unraveled before their eyes. When the screen went black, there was no argument left. The complaint was dismissed on the spot. Instead, the sisters were fined for violating HOA codes, their reputations gutted in the community they had once lorded over. Bills followed soon after. Repair costs for the tile, for the shattered glass, for the professional cleaning. All forwarded to the sisters. The HOA made sure of it. Their protests were loud, but their wallets were forced to answer. I saw the shift in the neighborhood with my own eyes. Where once people had laughed at their jokes and followed their lead, now they crossed the street to avoid them. Conversations hushed when they passed. Their empire of entitlement crumbled brick by brick, until all that was left were two angry women shouting into the void. One evening, weeks later, I sat alone by the pool, the water calm, the lights casting a soft glow across the surface. The chairs were upright, the deck swept clean. It was mine again, quiet, peaceful, whole. I leaned back with a glass of lemonade, the ice clinking gently, and let the satisfaction settle deep in my chest. As the cicadas sang in the distance, I let out a small laugh, low and unhurried. Funny thing about gates, I said to no one in particular. Sometimes the only way to keep the peace is to lock the crazy in. The water shimmered under the lights, calm at last, as the neighborhood carried on beyond the fence. And though I knew Emily and Ava would never stop scheming, never stop looking for some way to claw back the power they'd lost, it didn't matter. Their downfall was sealed. Their legacy was humiliation. The night air was cool against my skin as I closed my eyes, the faint sound of their distant voices no longer carrying any weight. For the first time in months, I felt free.